Welcome back. Now that we've got the folder structure, the files for the HTML and the CSS created, as well as all the default CSS rules that I need for the linking to my Google Fonts, the simple CSS reset, and defining the width of my website using the wrapper, I now start to take a look at the header area, where I have the header, the logo, and the navigation. I know the width of my header is going to be exactly 1000 pixels because that's the width of the website that I created in Photoshop. I know the logo is going to be about 500 pixels wide and the navigation is going to be about 500 pixels wide. Alright, knowing that little bit of information, I can start to go back to the HTML file, add in the content for the header, and start to define that. I'm going to choose my index.html file, and I want all of the content now that I code to be inside the wrapper because the wrapper is going to define the width of my page and make sure all the content's inside. So when I'm inside the wrapper, I'm going to start by typing header. Header is actually a default HTML5 tag, so I don't have to create a dividing area, I don't have to create a section, I don't have to do an ID or a class, it's just called header. And this header is going to have the logo and the navigation inside of it. But to begin with, I've got header here, and I want to define header inside my CSS. So back to my style.css file. Inside here, I'm simply going to create a rule below the wrapper. It's not an ID or a class, so I don't have to worry about any special characters. I can just type header. The header is a box, so it's going to have a width, and the width is going to be 1000 pixels. It's going to have a height, and if I remember correctly, it's going to be around 65 pixels. So I'm just going to punch that in now. We're going to add some floats and clears, in part just to get the practice of adding floats and clears. By default, I want it to float to the left of the wrapper that it's inside of. I don't want any boxes to the left or right of the header. Make sure nothing's on either side of it. So I'm going to add clear of both. And it's got a background color, so I'm going to add background dash color, and I'm going to actually go back to Photoshop and pick the color out of there because I want to grab a hexadecimal color. So I'm going to scroll over to Photoshop, grab my eyedropper tool, and click somewhere up here and choose a black from here. I'm going to click on my foreground color, and it's got the information here for me. I can see the HSB, RGB, CMYK, and here's my hexadecimal number. I'm going to choose this number, highlight the whole code, copy it, go back to brackets. It's a hexadecimal number, so I have to start with the number sign, Shift 3, and paste. So now I know that this is the actual color of black I'm looking for. So I've added a width, a height, a float, a clear, and a background color. And if I've done this all correctly, I should be able to see my header in the website now. If you'll notice, because I set the default rule, the reset rule, margin and padding to 0, this means that the header option wrapper makes my header touch the top of the web browser, which is exactly what I'd like. Great. Now that the header is created, I can go and start to create the area for the logo and for the navigation. So the logo starts, it's a div tag, so a dividing area, an ID because it only happens once on the page, logo, great. Inside my logo, I want to make sure that Google knows that this is really important, so I'm going to add a heading 1 tag and type in Ozio authentic sushi. Ooh, yuck. There we go. Ozio authentic sushi. This is my logo area, so I have two things to define here. I can define the logo, which is the box that the logo sits in, and I can start to define the heading 1 as well. If I take a look at by default in the web browser right now, I can see that Ozio authentic sushi is there, only if I highlight it because black text on a black background doesn't really have great contrast. So let's start to go in and first define logo, and then we'll define the heading 1. So inside the style.css, I head back in here, and because it's an ID, I have to add a hashtag in CSS and type the word logo. open curly bracket, close curly bracket. This has a width, and like we said in the Photoshop document, it looks about half of the 1,000 pixels of the header. I can add a height of 65 pixels as well to match the header. And I definitely want to add a float. And I want to make a float left because I want this to be on the left side. By adding the float, it'll allow me to add boxes side by side. Without the float, my next boxes, the navigation will go below the logo. So make sure that the float is in there, float left. Great. So we just defined the area for the logo. Next, I want to create a rule for the heading 1. So heading 1, if I look back in the HTML file, it's not an ID, it's not a class, it's just H1. So I can go to my CSS style sheet and type in H1, and we're going to define this rule. If I want to pull out what the font is, I can go back to Photoshop and I'll just double check some of the rules that we've got already created in Photoshop. So this is Ozio Authentic Sushi, and it's Squadra 1 regular, and it's about 57 points. So I'm going to go back into my CSS, find my font dash family rule up at the top here for Squadra 1, copy that, and paste it down into the heading. So I've got my font family. Now I want to add a font size, and the font size, I'm going to say about 57 pixels. I know that the color should be white, so we'll make sure that that's white as well. So in the heading 1, I've simply defined the font family, the font size, and the color. And let's see what it looks like in the web browser. Okay, so it's starting to come along. One of the things I'll notice is that this is capitalized and not all uppercase. So I need to go back and tell it to be uppercase. And I can do that with a simple rule in the heading 1 called text dash transform. And I want to make sure the value for that is uppercase. And there we go. I think I might want to add a little bit of letter spacing in between here to give it a little bit of breathing room for each letter. And I'm going to simply add another property for letter spacing. And I'm going to add 1 pixel and see how that looks. That's not too bad. So a little bit more space in between the words. Great. I also noticed that as a designer, I want to make sure I have some space away from the edge. It's too close to the left edge. I want to move that in. I probably want to keep this moved in on the left and on the right hand side, which means I need to address the header. So I'm going to go back into the header rule we have here. And I want to add space inside the box, so that's padding. So I'm going to say padding, 0 for the top, 0 for the right, 0 for the bottom, and 0 for the left. I want to add space to the left. So I'll change the last variable to 0 to 10 pixels, and we'll see how that looks. All right, not too bad. If I've added 10 pixels to the left, I'll probably want to add 10 pixels to the right. So let's do that right now in the header rule. So 10 pixels to the right and 10 pixels to the left. So now my padding for the header is padding 0 at the top, 10 pixels on the right, 0 at the bottom, 10 pixels on the left. And that should make sure there's some even spacing going around. Great. With the header and the logo created, I just need to work on the navigation. So let's get the content going inside the HTML file, and we'll style that up inside the CSS. So here's my index file. After the ID logo div, I'm going to create a nav. And again, this is an HTML default as well, so I don't have to create a div or a section with an ID or class. It's just nav. I'm going to place all the navigation titles inside a paragraph tag. So I've got the nav, the paragraph tag, and both closing tags. I'm going to go back to Photoshop now and copy the navigation titles and paste them into the HTML. Highlight all the text, go back to brackets and paste. I can get rid of all these spaces because the spaces, multiple spaces, don't matter to HTML. You'll notice that I have menu that starts with a capital letter and all the rest are uppercase. In the design, they all look uppercase, so I want to make sure in the HTML that they look uppercase as well. I'm not going to worry about it in the HTML. I'm going to make sure that that's defined in the CSS just like we did for the logo. All right, so I've got nav and paragraph tags. So the style .css, enter a few returns, and we'll start to add a new rule for nav. So again, we're defining the box that the navigation sits inside. So I'm going to say that the width, much like the logo, is going to be 500 pixels wide. It's going to have a height of 65 pixels. It's going to have a float, but this time I want to float the box instead of to the left, which will put it right beside the logo. I'm going to put it to the right, so I'll make sure it goes on the right hand side of this page. Great. The other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the text is aligned to the right as well. So it's not close to the logo, it's close to the right hand side. So I can simply add a property of text align center. Great. Again, I haven't defined what the paragraph tag looks like. So if I look at this in my web browser, I'll start to see this information down here. The reason that the navigation is down below is because I've said that this is 500 pixels, the logo, and the navigation is 500 pixels. I've also added 10 pixels on either side, which means that 500 plus 500 won't actually fit in this area anymore. So I just simply have to change the widths. I'm going to go back and say, great, my navigation is going to be 450 pixels now. And that should bring my navigation right up in line. And there it is, perfect. We have to style it, we have to do some positioning, but we're on our way. All right. Oh, my apologies, I said text align center. I want it text align to the right. Thank you for catching that. There we go. Now I need to go into the navigation. And in the navigation, in my HTML, you notice there's nav and then a paragraph tag. If I simply style a paragraph tag, then it'll apply to every single paragraph on the page. I want to make sure that specifically in the navigation, when there's a paragraph tag, make this look specifically like the navigation. So I can easily do that by creating another rule for nav space P. So in the navigation area, when there's a paragraph tag, make it look like this. I'm going to grab some of the fonts information from Photoshop, and I can go into the navigation and find out it's Titanium Web Bold, and it's 11 points. So I can go back to my CSS, scroll back up to the top where I can find a font family, copy that, paste it back inside. Font family, font size is what I want to add next, font dash size. I'm going to make it 11 pixels. I'm going to set the color to be white as well. And I remember from the design that I want to make sure that this is all uppercase, so I need to add text dash transform uppercase. And let's see what it looks like now in the web browser. Okay, so it's starting to come along. There's the menu up at the top. I want to add word spacing to add some space in between here. I want to set the weight to make sure it's bolder, and then I want to move it down. So we're almost there. Let's start by adding a weight to this. So the font weight, I know that I included 400, which is regular, and 700, which is bold. So I want to add a font dash weight of 700. So back in the navigation paragraph tag, font dash weight 700. And now I've just made the text bolder. I want to go in and add some word spacing. And the word spacing I'm going to set to maybe 40 pixels, and we'll just see how that looks. Not too bad, might be a little wide. Maybe 35. And I'll let you guys play with it to get to the spacing that you'd like. So it's bold. The words are spaced out. I now need to move this down to the bottom. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to make sure that this paragraph rule gets moved down to the bottom by using margin to push things away. So in the nav P rules, I'm going to simply add a margin to the top. And I'm going to guess at 35 pixels and see how that looks. Not too bad. All right, so we've created the logo, the navigation, and the header area. We're done. The next thing I want to take a look at in the next video, the following video will be the header area.